Okay, we're live, but we're going to wait a minute or so for other people to join in. Let's see if I can see it. Okay. We'll just wait a minute.
Mm-hmm. Where are you now? What page?
We are going to be on page 156.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, we've made some progress.
Yeah. I miss a lot too. I miss a lot too.
Yeah, well, you did have a good excuse. All right. I think we should go ahead and get started.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anybody's watching, but that's okay. We are here, and that's what matters. Okay, so we're on page 156 in the Art Scroll Chumash. We are in Parsha Vayeitzei, Bereshis, Genesis chapter 30, verse 2 is where we left off. So the previous page. We finished with verse 2. So we're going to move forward from here. So starting with verse 3, she said, "Here's my maid Bilhah. Bilhah, consort with her that she may bear upon my knees, and I too may be built up through her." It's an interesting thing. One of the ways that Lavan tricked Yaakov into marrying Leah, that he didn't know that he'd married Leah, was because he had the two maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah. And Zilpah is the younger one, and the custom was to give the younger maidservant for the younger daughter. So because Zilpah came with Leah when Yaakov still thought it was Rachel before he discovered who it was. It was another way that Lavan tricked him, because he had the younger maidservant with the older daughter. But Yaakov thought it was the younger daughter, so he thought, the younger maidservant would go with her. So then later on, they were switched. So anyway, so here's my maid Zilpah, consort with her that she may bear upon my knees, and I too may be built up through her. So she gave him Bilhah, her maidservant, as a wife, and Yaakov consorted with her. Bilhah conceived and bore Yaakov a son. And Rachel said, "God has judged me." The word judgment is din, right? God has judged me. He also heard my voice, and he's given me a son. She therefore called his name Dan, from the same word as same root as din, judgment. Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, conceived again and bore Yaakov a second son. And Rachel said, "Sacred schemes I have maneuvered to equal my sister, and I have also prevailed." And she called his name Naphtali. If you look in the Hebrew, in verse 8, it says, "Vatomer Rachel," Rachel said, this is verse Chet, right here, right? Naftuli Elokim, Niftaltan. You can see the root of the word Naphtali, of the name Naphtali, is in there twice. Naftulai Elokim Niftalti. That nun pei tes taf. Sorry. So it indicates this sort of maneuvering or scheming kind of thing. When Leah saw that she had stopped giving birth, this is verse 9 now, she took Zilpah, her maidservant, and gave her to Yaakov as a wife. Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, bore a son. Now for Zilpah, it doesn't say that she was pregnant or conceived. For all the other ones, it says that she conceived. The reason was because Zilpah, being the younger maidservant, you couldn't tell, she didn't show the pregnancy because of her youth. Leah's maidservant bore a son, and Leah declared, "Good luck has come." So she called his name God. Again, these are all derivations. The names are derivations of the meaning of what the mother says when that son is born, when that child is born. If you look at verse 11, it says, "Vatomer Leah, ba God, God has come. God being not what we say in English God, but in Hebrew meaning mazel or luck or good fortune. Vatikra es shemo God. She named him. She called his name God. Verse 12. Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, bore a second son to Yaakov. Leah declared, "In my good fortune, for women have deemed me fortunate." She named his name. She called his name Asher. Again, looking at the name, Vatomer Leah Ashrei. Ashrei, we say, is praiseworthy or fortunate, right? So Asher is the same root. Aleph Shin Resh. Ki Ashruni Benos Vatikra Es Shemo Asher. So she called the name Asher for Ashrei. Okay, then verse 14. So at this point, we have Leah has 4 sons, Bilhah has 2 sons, and Zilpah has 2 sons. So there are 8 of the 12 sons have been born. And they have through prophecy, they know that there are going to be 12. Okay? So, and Leah has not given birth in a little while at this point, right? It said earlier that she stopped giving birth. So Reuven, this is verse 14. Reuven went out in the days of the wheat harvest. He found dudayim in the field and brought them to Leah, his mother. Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's dudayim." We're just going to stop right there with the one verse because there's some very interesting things in this verse that we need to unpack. So this is Rabbi Daniel Travis, Torah.org. He says, so when someone is walking in a private or a public place, gardens or any kind of a museum, you go down to the mall down in the Capitol or a private yard, whatever it is, it's forbidden for us to cut flowers or to pick from the trees, and that even means leaves off the trees. Right? We're not allowed to pick anything from any of those trees. From our own yard, that's one thing. Anywhere else, we're not allowed to pick from. So our understanding, that according to Jewish law, is that we've been given permission, either through public or private lands, to walk there, not to take from there. Right? Unless if we go in an apple orchard and we're paying for the privilege of taking apples off the trees to save them from having to do it, right? So then we pay for the apples, right? That's different. So Reuven was well aware of this halacha, this law, and he was very meticulous and very careful about it, and he made sure to only take wildflowers, these dudayim, that were what's called hefker in Hebrew, which means ownerless. Right? It wasn't necessary for the Torah to tell us that Reuven's not a thief. We know he's not a thief. He's a very righteous person, right? Like all of his brothers as well. But the Torah is telling us here about the subtleties of what it means to be an honest and careful person about the laws of business ethics and money and property. Okay? It's a very important thing. After the 4th son, Leah was clear that Leah was no longer being blessed to get pregnant. Right? And she knew that, and her family knew that. Right? The dudayim had medicinal properties as a fertility drug. Okay? And Reuven picked them for his mother in her honor. Right? He's honoring his mother for her well-being and to help her in her desire to become more close with Yaakov and to be happy. So for these purposes, Reuven could have rationalized and said, well, they're wildflowers. The owner of the land didn't plant them. They just grew here on their own. So it's okay for me to take them. That's called rationalization, right? He would be taking from the land without permission and rationalizing that it's okay to do so, right? He was so inspired to help his mother that, it would have been easy for him to make that excuse. But that is considered theft. According to the Torah, that is theft, right? In his desire to act truthfully and to be careful and not about the laws of guarding other another's possessions and being careful not to take what's not ours, he was able to overcome his desire to help his mother and make sure and act in the complete honesty, and to only take from these flowers when they were ownerless. There's a time of year when things like that are ownerless, and that's when he took from them. So we have to bring that down into our lives and recognize that no matter how good our intentions might be, we have to always consider the ramifications of our actions on the possessions of others. Right? Even though nearly all mitzvahs in the Torah can be ignored or set aside for the purposes of saving a life, the sin of theft is so serious that even to save a life, we're only allowed to take property from someone else on the condition that we will repay in full later on. Okay, we're not allowed to just take it. Say, well, it's to save a life, so fine, you can take it. No, that's not how it works. You can take it, but it has to be on the condition that you're going to fully pay it back later. And it's only to save a life. We can't steal, meaning take without paying, even to save a life, unless it's with that condition, right? For less urgent mitzvahs, it's completely forbidden to take another's belongings or to damage another's belongings, right? If it's in the process of doing a mitzvah and we damage another's property, then we're fully responsible to pay for everything we damaged and replace it, regardless of noble intentions, whatever those might be. Okay? So how was Reuven rewarded for the fact that he overcame his desire to help his mother and he instead waited until the right time to be able to harvest these wildflowers at a time when it was appropriate without stealing? He was rewarded because his descendants, who were shepherds, were given a portion of land in Eretz Yisrael that was lush and abundant with grassland and meadows, and they could graze their flocks. Right? Even though so shepherds are generally known for being a little less than careful about other people's property lines. Right? Letting their sheep and their cows graze on other people's property is not usually a strong point of shepherds about whether or not they're careful about that. So the reward to Reuven for being so careful about this was that his descendants were granted an area of land in Eretz Yisrael that had plenty of space for the cows and sheep to pasture, and they wouldn't have to worry about coming onto the sin of theft. Okay? Questions? Comments? Okay. We're going to talk about that in a little more depth here. Same verse 14. So this is from Rabbi Yisachar Frand. So there's a medrash from Mishlei. I'm going to read the verse in Mishlei. It's a good one. It's one that many people actually already know, especially if you're connected in any way to Aleph Bet Montessori. It says this is chapter 22, verse 6 of Mishlei, also known as Proverbs. It says, Chanoch lenar al pi darko, meaning teach or train a child according to his way. Gam ki yaskin lo asur yasur mimenu, and even when he gets old, he will not swerve. He will not go off the path. So train a child according to his or her way, and even as they grow old, they won't swerve from the path. So there's a medrash on that verse that adds to it that the descendants of Reuven came to Eretz Yisrael later. They were given their portion of land in Averi Hayarden, across the Jordan, what's known as Transjordan, right? The west bank of the Jordan River, which is part of Eretz Yisrael. Let's be clear about that. That is our land, period. Okay, but the question though, is what is the connection for our purposes tonight? What is the connection between these three seemingly disparate matters of the dudayim, the flowers, right? The chinuch, the teaching of children, and the inheritance of the Bnei Reuven, of the children of Reuven. What's the connection between these three things? So the commentaries say, as we talked about just a minute ago, that during the days of the harvest of the wheat crop means Why then? Because that's when the crop was hefker, was ownerless, right? It was at the end. The owners there are portions of the harvest that the owner of the field is not allowed to keep, paya and other things that the corners of the field they're not allowed to reap those, and then things that fall during while you're gathering, when you're putting things on the wagon, for example, if things fall off, you're not allowed to pick those back up. Those are left for the poor. If you pick those up, as you're the owner of the field, that's a big transgression. So this is during the days when the things are ownerless and anybody can come pick them up, right? So that's when Reuben went. So he was very particular, like I said earlier, about making sure there was no theft involved in the collection of the dudayim. Where did he learn? So where did he learn this honesty? Where did he learn to be such an honest guy? Okay, he learned it. He learned to be meticulous about the laws of possessions, about monetary laws, from his father, right? From Yaakov. Because throughout Yaakov's life, he always represented the attribute of truthfulness. That was his thing, right? Avraham is chesed, kindness. Yitzchak is gevurah, strength, judgment, and Yaakov is emes, truth. So we say, it says in Mishlei there, educate the child according to their nature, right? Their way, right? So Reuven learned honesty and meticulousness about the monetary laws from his father, and he taught that to his children, right? And his children taught that to their children, right? And et cetera, generation to generation. Hundreds of years later, when the Jews are going into Eretz Yisrael, and it's time to go into the land, and they're dividing it up, right? What do they say? This is in Bamidbar, in Numbers, chapter 32, verse 1. It says, where is it? I'm on the wrong page here. Helps if I go to where the bookmark is. There we go. It says, the children of Reuven and the children of Gad had abundant livestock, very great. They saw the land of Yazer and the land of Gilad, and behold, the place was a place for livestock. Perfect. Good for us. Right? Reuven and Gad had large flocks, and large flocks tend to graze, like we said earlier, on the land of others. Right? So Reuven was concerned that if he was on the west side of the Jordan, where it was going to be more populated, where there'd be more people, more tribes, more congested, more traffic, that his animals would end up grazing on the land of other people. That's theft. He didn't want any part of that. So he didn't want it. So he wanted to. That would be a violation. He thought of his legacy from his father of honesty and taking good care in monetary dealings. So he expressed his preference to settle in the land of Aver Hayarden, the Transjordan, right, where there were fewer people, less concern about coming on to this sin of theft because of the multitude of his animals. So this is an important lesson for us. The only way to properly teach our children about honesty, ethical following of laws like this, is to be honest and meticulous ourselves in our own lives, in our businesses, and in our dealings with other people. That means, for example, when we take a 15-year-old child to a place where the child price is 14 and under, we pay the adult price for them. We don't say the child's 14. Right? That's absolutely critical because they are listening and they are watching. Right? Even if it's twice as much, even if it's 10 times as much, doesn't matter. You wouldn't. What lesson would you pay? Well, how much would you pay, to teach, for that lesson to be ingrained in your child? And that action will ingrain it in your child much more than just saying you can't lie. Showing them how that's done is far more important. Right? So that connection between Reuven going out at the end of the harvest time for the Dudayim, and Reuven's descendants being asked to settle in the Aver HaYarden, in the Transjordan, that's connected through this idea of chinuch, of education, of teaching his children the right way to do things. Okay? Mm-hmm. All right. Any comments? Questions? All right. Let's go forward. So this is from Rabbi Shlomo Katz. So in Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, okay, Song of Songs is a love poem between God and the Jewish people. It's frequently misunderstood and in the English translation as between a man and a woman. It's actually not something that's really a good idea to learn in English at all because the language is so deep. But in Shir HaShirim is a verse that says, "The Dudayim flowers emitted a fragrance, and at our doors are precious fruits." Seem to be disconnected ideas. The Dudayim flowers emitted a fragrance, and at our doors are precious fruits. So there's a midrash on that verse as well. There's a midrash on lots of things. It says the Dudayim emitted a fragrance refers to Ruvain. That's what it says in the midrash. And at our doors are precious fruits refers to the Hanukkah candles. Okay? What's the connection between Ruvain and Hanukkah? Okay, we're connecting Reuven to all kinds of things tonight. What's the connection between Reuven and Hanukkah? And also, while we're at it, the halacha in the time of the Gemara, the time of the Talmud, was that the menorah was placed at the door of the house. Okay, you'd have the mezuzah on one side and the menorah on the other. And if you walked through the door, you'd go between the two. So the idea being that you'd be surrounded by mitzvahs. You'd have the mezuzah on one side and the menorah on the other. So nowadays we don't light the menorah outside because the idea was that you would light it outside to publicize the miracle. Now we're publicizing the miracle inside the house for the people who live in the house. You light it in the window so that people on the street can see it, but if there aren't going to be people on the street to see it, then it's not even necessary to light it in the window. You can just light it on your table. But you light it, it's best to light it in the window so perhaps people can see it outside. So the Medrash asks, the Medrash is the oral law. It's written, says, around the same time as the Gemara, maybe earlier. It says, so what's the connection between Reuven and Hanukkah, and why is the menorah placed at the door? Right? It says, at our doors are precious fruits, and the Medrash says this relates to Hanukkah. So the Rabbi Avram Yafen, Ha'etz, Amen. The Novardok, the Rosh Yeshiva of Novardok died in 1970. He said, back when we talked about Cain and Hevel, right? Cain and Abel, after Cain kills his brother, right? And God's complaining. He's complaining to God about why his offering wasn't accepted, right? And God says to him, this is before he kills his brother, and he's complaining that his offering wasn't accepted, right? And he says, God says to him, surely if you improve yourself, you will be forgiven. But if you do not improve yourself, sin crouches at the door, right? Sin crouches at the door. It's always waiting for you. It's the Yetzer Hara, right? It's always waiting for you. So all spiritual downfalls begin when we open the door to the Yetzer Hara. That's what he's saying there, right? That was the unique nature of this was the unique nature of the oppression from the Greeks, right? The Greek oppression was not about forcing the Jews to convert to another religion. They could not have cared less. They didn't want us to convert. What did they want? They wanted to entice us to come into their study halls and spend all of our time learning their secular Greek wisdom instead of learning Torah. Okay, that was what they wanted. That was how the Greeks hoped that their beliefs would eventually infiltrate the Jewish belief system. Sound familiar? Mm-hmm. The halls of universities, the halls of, sound familiar? So how did the Hashmonaim, the Maccabees as it were, as we call them today, defeat the Greeks? They placed a candle at the door as a guard. Right? A candle at the door. Hanukkah candles became that candle at the door. Right? So it says in Mishlei, in Proverbs again, chapter 6, verse 23. For a commandment is a ner. A mitzvah is a ner. A commandment is a light or a lamp or a candle, and the Torah is light. Right? Ki ner mitzvah v'Torah or. So a candle is a mitzvah, and the Torah is light. Right? Meaning, so they refuse to allow even a small amount of Greek influence to affect their lifestyle. That's how the Chashmonayim won. Okay? It's not an easy thing to do. But it's important for us in the way we live our lives. We have to be aware of this influence on us. Okay, it says later on in Bereshis, it says, and it came to pass when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuven went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard, Israel being Yaakov. This is after Rachel died. We have to understand two things. The Torah is always more critical of us than it would seem is necessary based on the thing that happened, because the Torah is holding us to a very high standard. And the Torah, and this is the kind of thing where, you know, the way the Jews look in the Torah was either written by anti-Semites or by God, because it couldn't have been written by people who were saying, "Hey, follow us because we're just like these people," right? So, but this sin of Reuven, according to Chazal, according to our sages, is a very subtle thing. He didn't have relations with his father's wife. That would be a clear sin, a clear avera. But he moved her bed. He wanted his mother's bed, Leah's bed, to be in Yaakov's tent, not the maidservant of Rachel. Yaakov wanted the maidservant of Rachel's in his tent because it reminded him more of Rachel, who was his intended wife, and his favorite wife. I think that's, you know, anyway, we'll get to that when we get to that. In the meantime, even though Reuven's sin was very, very subtle, he still repented. He did a very serious teshuvah, because he recognized and understood that if the door to sin is opened even a crack, if we let our spiritual guard down just even the slightest amount, downfall follows. So it's a very serious thing. We have to be very, very careful with ourselves and be honest with ourselves about what doors we're allowing to be open, even a crack. Okay? If you want to talk about specific things that I think are those open doors, we can talk about them when we're not on camera. I'd be happy to talk about those things with you privately. All right, questions? All right, moving forward, verse 15. But she said to her, was your taking my husband insignificant, and now to take even my son's dudayim? Rachel said, therefore he shall lie with you tonight in return for your son's dudayim. This was a big mistake by Rachel. She gave up her time to be intimate and time to be close to the great tzaddik Yaakov in exchange for some flowers. You know, it says in I think in Rashi or in the Medrash that this mistake is why she did not merit to be buried with Yaakov. Okay. Yeah, well, the people in this book are held to a higher standard than we are, right? You don't get to be a forefather or foremother just, you know, with okay midos. It's a big deal to give up any time that we can be with a truly righteous person, and Rachel should not have according to this according to Rashi, I believe it's Rashi, according to this Medrash at least. She should not have given up that time with him. And it's not a small thing. And when you think about it, what more? It seems like a little bit of a chutzpah for Leah to say, was your taking my husband insignificant? Rachel gave her the secret codes so that she wouldn't be embarrassed, humiliated publicly on her wedding night. Rachel gave her that. And now Leah's saying, you took my husband? That seems like a little bit of a chutzpah. I mean, I'm not calling Leah a chutzpah. I mean, she did have, once they were married. And we said, later it says, when he marries Rachel, it says, then he loved Rachel more than Leah, which meant that he loved Leah. And he loved her wholeheartedly during that week. So not chutzpah necessarily, but it seems chutzpahdik to us in our eyes. But Rachel's kindness, what the chesed she did for her sister, seems to be not being fully appreciated here. Not that Leah didn't have gratitude. It's clear that she does. She names her son Yehuda after all. But there's a serious question you could ask on this. All right, it's verse 16. When Yaakov came from the field that in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, it is to me that you must come, for I have clearly hired you with my son's dudayim. So he lay with her that night. And actually she has a baby from that night. God hearkened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Yaakov a fifth son. And Leah declared, God has granted me my reward, because he gave my maidservant to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. Asisi is the word that Issachar I think is coming from. The ECC. So she gave her maidservant to her husband, and Issachar comes from that. Then Leah conceived again and bore Yaakov a sixth son. And Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will make his permanent home with me, for I have borne him 6 sons. She knows there's 12. She's got half of them. She knows there's going to be 12. She called his name Zevulun. So that name comes from Zeved. Yizbaleni. Ishi. So that her husband will establish, this time her husband will establish his permanent home with her, because she's gave him 6 sons. So Zebulun, was the name Zebulun comes from. Afterwards she bore a daughter, and she called her name Dinah. God remembered, verse 22, God remembered Rachel. God hearkened to her, and he opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son. Now this is after, this is Numbers 11 and 12. She's got the last 2. It says, when Leah became pregnant for a 7th time, and this is verse 21. When Leah became pregnant for a 7th time, she prayed that it would be a girl, because she knew there would be 12 sons. She had 6. Bilhah had 2. Zilpah had 2. There's going to be 12, and Rachel has none. So she didn't want Rachel to have less than the maidservants, or less than, to have only 1 or none. So she prayed that her 7th pregnancy should be a girl. And it says in the Midrash that God changed the gender of the baby in Leah's womb from male to female. This was inside the first 40 days of Leah's pregnancy, which is where, I believe this is where we get the halacha from, that you're not allowed to daven for the gender, you're not allowed to pray for the gender of a baby after 40 days of pregnancy. Because at that point, it's considered set. Okay, there's we don't have the open miracles today where we would have the kind of gender switching. It also says later on that Yosef was supposed to be female, and so the male soul that was in Dinah went into the baby in Rachel, and the female soul that was in Rachel went into Leah. That's how we got Dinah out of Leah and Yosef out of Rachel. And also, Yosef's wife later on is going to be the daughter of Dinah. So they end up getting back, coming back together in that way. All right, so Joseph is born later, but I mean, these things metaphysical things that we don't have to follow a strict timeline so much. So God remembered Rachel. God hearkened to her, and he opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. So she called his name Yosef, saying, may Hashem add on to me and for me another son. She's already saying, I want another one, right? They got two, she got two, she got two, she got six. I got one, I want another, right? She's not being greedy. She's saying, we'll talk in a minute about what she's saying here. But if you can see in the name Yosef comes from V'tikra Shemo Yosef Lemor Yosef Hashem li ben Acher. So she called his name Yosef, saying, Yosef, add on for me, Hashem, for me, ben Acher, another son. That's on verse 24. So this is from Rabbi Leib Kelman. So Rashi says there are two reasons why Rachel merited that Hashem would remember her. It says God remembered Rachel and God hearkened her and opened her womb. There's two reasons why she merited this. One, because she gave the codes to Leah, right, on the signs that she had made with Yaakov for their wedding night. Because remember, they suspected that Lavan was going to pull something like this, so they made up these codes. Why else would they have these codes made up? Because they suspected they were dealing with this underhanded guy. So just in case. And then to save her sister from being humiliated, she gave them to her. So that's one. And the second reason was because that the merit was because Hashem saw that she was troubled and bothered by the fact that she might end up having to marry Esav if Yaakov would divorce her because she had no children. Right? So she was concerned that she was going to end up having to marry Esav. And that bothered her because she knew what Esav was. Okay? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh bivaro. Sorry about that. It's that time of year. Now, generally, Rashi does not give more than one explanation for something. Right? Usually just gives one. Although we're going to see two times tonight. Can I have one of those napkins, please? We're going to see two times tonight where he did two. So normally when he does that, when he gives a second one, we're allowed to assume that the first one on its own was not adequate and it needed to be reinforced or supplemented with another reason. Here, in this case, the first reason alone, as we talked about earlier, for sure should be enough. Leah was going to, marry Yaakov, and Rachel gave her the signs so she wouldn't be humiliated. She gave up marrying the tzaddik Yaakov, building the Jewish people, in order to save her sister from humiliation. That should be reason enough, right? That's reason enough, right? So why would Rashi need to give a second reason? The first one's enough. It suffices, right? What stronger justification could there be for Rachel to have her prayers answered? I don't think any of us would say that we've done anything as great as that in our lives. Right? I mean, it's just beyond. But thank God we aren't usually tested with things like this, but I certainly know that I've never done anything as great as what Rachel did. And she had waited, remember, for 7 years to marry Yaakov. The day finally arrives, and her father says, no, switching. You can imagine how disappointed she was, how bitter she must have been. But according to Chazal, according to our sages, she did not protest. She didn't make a fuss. She didn't make a scene. She didn't embarrass her sister or her father, and gave the passwords, the codes to her sister, to Leah, to avoid embarrassing her. How much more noble and selfless a deed could there be in the history of civilization? Right? This is called Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice. Right? Self-sacrifice, putting your own soul in danger for the sake of others. The Medrash on Eicha's Lamentations, says, it talks about how our ancestors, our great ancestors, our Avos and Imos, at the time of the first exile, when the first temple was destroyed, that they went to in Olam Haba, that they went to God to try to intercede on behalf of the Jewish people, to save the Jewish people at the time of the exile. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, they all went. King David, they all went to God to plead with him. One by one, standing before the heavenly throne, begging God to bring the Jewish people back. But they were all turned away. It was only when Rachel appeared to God and pleaded and cried out to God, Ribono Shel Olam, which means Master of the universe, I did not hesitate to accept another woman into my house. Can't you too forgive your children for the sin of idolatry? Right? The sin of idolatry is considered like the Jews are cheating on God. Right? So Rachel says, I didn't hesitate to bring another woman into my house, to give up my husband for another woman. How can you not forgive your children for idolatry? Her prayer was answered, and the remembrance of her deed brought about the promise from God, your children will return to their borders. And so that's why Rachel's buried where she's buried. It's on the road to Babylon, to Babel, that her tears would accompany them. So Rashi, despite all this, Rashi provides a second reason for why Rachel merited to have children now. Why did she need another reason? Her prayer was enough, based on the merit of this deed, to bring the end of Gullus, of the first Gullus, first exile. I mean, this act of Mesiras Nefesh, of self-sacrifice, it's incredible. But the thing about acts of Mesiras Nefesh, as inspiring and noble as they are, is that they usually represent in some way a surrender, a giving up of something, right? Something precious. Sometimes life itself, right? An inspirational act or a heroic gesture. These things they go a long way, but they don't always secure the future. They don't necessarily secure the future, right? There were many acts of Mesiras Nefesh that we know of from the Holocaust and other persecutions of the Jews, and they didn't result in securing a future for that family or that community, but they were still acts of Mesiras Nefesh, right? Many of these come about through things like that, where you're defying tyranny, showing a will to suffer, even die, right, for the sake of a higher cause. Rachel willingly gave up her husband, not knowing she'd ever get to marry Yaakov. She didn't know what was going to happen a week later, right? So she did this brave, magnanimous act in response to a crisis that her sister was facing, right? So what was the other aspect of Rachel's character that made her even more deserving? So the reason is because for years and years she worried that she was going to end up the wife of Esav, right? And the thought of that pained her to no end, because her deepest longing, her deepest desire was to have a share in the building of the house of Israel. Okay? To be denied that to her was more painful than death. That's why she says in verse 2, give me children, otherwise I'm dead. Right? That's how much it meant to her. Right? Her desire, she wanted to be among the mothers of Israel. And that showed how righteous she was. Right? And that required a heavenly response. So in her, we see the necessary components for greatness. This is where we should be taking notes, paying attention. What are the components for greatness? Readiness for Mesiras Nefesh when it's necessary. Being prepared to make self-sacrifices when the time is right. Even death, if it's the appropriate thing. We have to know when that is. We need to study these things. And to be equally strong in our determination to build the future of the Jewish nation. Okay? That means being Mesiras Nefesh for the education of Jewish children, for building Jewish communities, for insulating them from the pernicious influences of the secular world and the sewer that is the cable that comes into our houses. Okay? All those things. All right. This is for, that was, who was that from? It was very good. Rabbi Leib Kelman. No, that was, Rabbi Leib Kelman. All right, this is from Rabbi Eliyahu Hoffman. This is, I think this is the difficult one. Is this the difficult one? No, probably won't. We might not get to the difficult one tonight. Okay. When Rachel says, here, verse 23, she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. What disgrace does Rachel have that she could be talking about here? We don't know of any disgrace. Rachel was, what we really know of Rachel is this incredible thing she did for her sister. That's really the only thing we really know about Rachel. And that she was a shepherd, and that she was beautiful. But, the big thing is this thing she did for her sister. So, Rashi again cites two explanations. And in this case, it may be that one is not enough. It really just does need support from the other one. The one is that she felt disgraced by her barrenness, especially in the face of her sister who had 6 sons and a daughter, and the 2 maidservants who each had 2 sons. The other is that, this is from Rashi, and this is, we talk about the rambunctiousness of kids today, especially boys. Rashi says, when one has no son, the mother has nobody to blame for her mistakes. Once she has a son, she can blame things on him. If the father comes home and says, who broke this? She can say, your son. If the father comes home and says, who ate my figs? She can say, your son. That's from a Midrash. So, this latter explanation does not mean that the mother lies in claiming these things, right? If it was eaten by the son, what would she gain anyway? He deserves to be blamed, right? He deserves to, if he ate something that was his father's without permission, he deserves to get, what's coming to him. So it perhaps means that once someone has the child, they're no longer expected to be quite so perfect. This is a difficult thing for me to get through my head when we were late for something, and I complained to my wife that why can't we get out of the house on time? She says, we have 2, 3, 4, whatever number of kids we had at the time. Nobody expects us to be on time. Like, oh, okay. I got it when she said it. It took me a while. Once there's a child, no, people don't expect them to be perfect anymore. So if the father comes home and says, who broke these plates? She could say, I did. Because I was up all night taking care of your son, and I was tired, and I slipped and I broke the plate. Who ate these figs? I did, because I was exhausted from spending all day and all night caring for your son, and I needed the food, and I needed to relax, so I ate the figs. But okay, so that's all well and good. But is it really possible that these were Rachel's feelings? That now I can have a son and I'll have somebody to blame. I don't have to be so perfect anymore. That's what Rachel was thinking. Doesn't really add up, right? Can't we assume that Rachel's prayers were inspired by her desire to be one of the Imaot, one of the foremothers of our nation? I mean, she says that, the anguish that she's expressing back in verse 1, give me children, otherwise I'm dead. I mean, this is anguish. Right? I mean, she didn't want kids just to have somebody to blame stuff on, right? To some fear of imperfection that she might have had. So, it's an interesting question. Now, the first blessing we say in Birchas HaShachar, not the first blessing we say when we wake up, but the first blessing we say in Shul for Birchas HaShachar is Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher nasana sechvi vina lavchein bein yom uvein laila. Blessed are you, God, who has gave us understanding to discern between day and night. Right? Okay? Basic. So the altar of Slobodka, you know where Slobodka is? Ukraine. Nassim Tzvi Finkel was the Rosh Yeshiva of Slobodka, founder and Rosh Yeshiva of Slobodka Yeshiva, died in 1921 in Eretz Yisrael. He asked a question on this. Why did Chazal, our sages, choose to begin our day by praising a faculty that seems rather simple, the ability to discern between night and day? It's not our most complex discernment that we have, right?
Right.
We have more complicated things that we compute every day than is it day or night, right? Out there, that's night. Okay, I got that one. Right? You hear what I'm saying? Yes?
Go further.
Dictates what you
Go
do.
further.
That dictates what you do.
Well, of course, but
I
okay.
wanna
So
hear more of this.
the Gemara in Brachos says, "What blessing do we make over rainfall?" Rav Yehuda answers, "We give praise to you, God, for every single drop of rain you have given us." Now, that's the end of the quote from the Gemara. Why is it necessary for us to praise Hashem for each and every drop of rain? Right? Isn't it sufficient to just thank God for rainfall in general, that waters the crops, that give us the food that we eat? Right? It seems that Chazal wanted us to realize that rainfall is not just a large thing. Rainfall is a combination of millions and millions of tiny drops of water. And each and every one of those drops is a kindness from God. Okay? Assuming that it's not the kind of rainfall that's destructive, that results in a flood, that kills all of the animals and like Noah's time. Right? So to praise rainfall without mentioning the drops would be to ignore the fact that each and every drop, down to the very last one, is worthy of our appreciation and recognition. And that we should thank God for each and every single individual drop of rain. So our brains are the most complex and probably the least understood part of the human body. Right? I mean, there's things about the human brain that discovering all the time. Speech, movement, visual perception, spatial awareness, depth perception, colors, shades of colors, shadows, light. The network of our brain's faculties seems endless and, forgive the expression, mind-boggling. Right? Of all of its functions, the ability to discern between night and day seems rather simple compared to these other things. Right? And very basic. The Alter of Slobodka is saying that that's precisely why our daily prayers need to begin here, to remind us of this idea. There's a prayer we say, or a series of, I guess it's called Nishmas. The soul of every living being will bless your name. We say it on Shabbos and Yom Tov. We do not say this on weekdays. And in the Pesukei de Zimra, this is one of the things that you cannot skip. Right? And on weekdays, you can't skip Baruch She'amar, Ashrei, and Yishtabach. On Shabbos and Yom Tov, it's those three plus this, Nishmas. In the Art Scroll Siddur, it's on page 400. And there's a quote in here. "To you alone we give thanks. Were our mouth as full of song as the sea, and our tongue as full of joyous song as its multitude of waves, and our lips as full of praise as the breath of the heavens, and our eyes as brilliant as the sun and the moon, and our hands as outspread as eagles of the sky, and our feet as swift as hinds." A hind is a deer, I guess. "We could still not thank you sufficiently, Hashem, our God and God of our forefathers, and to bless your name for even one of the thousands of thousands, and myriads of favors that you perform for us and for our ancestors and for us." It's a beautiful way of saying, all these different things. We have to thank you for we have to be thankful for each and every thing, even the things that we can't wrap our brains around. Right? So the Alter of Slobodka is saying this is what Chazal is telling us, and that the daily prayers begin here to remind us of this idea, that each and every thing, even the small thing like discerning night and day, which seems like an easy one. Rachel did not want to raise a scapegoat. Oh, he broke the plate. Oh, he ate the figs. That's not what she was about. That was the furthest thing from her mind when she was praying for a child. Right? When her request was granted by God, she did not overlook even the smallest kindness it entailed. She recognized all of it. She perceived and appreciated even the most minute things. Right? Even something as small as the fact that she would no longer be expected to be quite so perfect, because now she had a little boy running around the house. Right? So she's thanking God even for that. So I once heard about a man who had everything worked perfect, sculpted, beautiful, good, good brain, good dexterity, agile, smart, funny. Everything worked about him, except for one small thing. The muscles that kept his eyes open did not receive their signal properly from the brain, and he literally had to hold his eyes open. Imagine that. It's not something we think about, but it's something we should be thankful for. Right? Even that, these muscles that we don't even know that they exist, they work. Okay, when we consider the endless factors that make our day just so, right? We should be humbled and filled with gladness and appreciation for everything that God does for us. It's so common for us to see the forest but completely overlook all the trees, right? And the grass and the leaves and the flowers and the fresh air, okay? And the chirping birds, right? If we focus only on the major life events, life-changing events, then we'll lose sight of all the countless, myriad, thousands and thousands, thousands of thousands of kindnesses that we constantly depend on to live. Each and every one of them deserving of our infinite praise and appreciation. Okay. We're running low on time. All right. Quick one here. So this is from Rabbi Yisrael Seiner. He says, Hashem remembering, it says Hashem remembered Rachel. The idea of Hashem remembering something always refers to a specific act. When someone did something specific that Hashem remembers later. Hashem remembered Avram. Hashem remembered, right? What's he remembering? Rashi says he's remembering that Rachel gave the signs to Leah. So we have to, we talked already about this, how selfless that was. That, she did not know that a week later she was going to get to marry Yaakov also. Right? Nevertheless, she did this. And what were the long-term repercussions? Rachel was actually, physically, biologically, sterile. She was not able to have children. Hashem remembered Rachel and opened her womb. He remembered the empathy that she had for Leah, and he created fertility in her where no possibility for it had existed previously. Right? Her willingness to forfeit becoming a matriarch enabled her to become a matriarch. That's how great it was what she did. Okay, a little something on this week's parsha, and then something hopefully on Hanukkah. Okay, because Hanukkah's coming. All right, this is Rabbi Shraga Simmons. So Yosef in this week's parsha, Vayeshev, Yosef is thrown into a pit by his brothers. And the Torah describes the pit as empty and without water. Now, what does empty mean? Empty means there's nothing in it. So why does it have to say without water?
Sometimes you can dig, you can strike water.
Okay, but then it's not empty. Then it's a pit with water. But if it's empty, then there's no water. Right? So the answer is that there is no such thing as a completely empty pit. Because just like nature abhors a vacuum, just like there will always be something that permeates a space. Okay, there was no water, but it did, meaning it didn't contain water, but it did contain other things. It contained dangerous things like scorpions and snakes. Mm-hmm. Okay? In our own lives, it's the same thing. A pit without water is a life without Torah. Right? The Torah is always compared to water. Right? There's nothing neutral in the world. Right? And we are never neutral. We're never just cruising, status quo, holding in place. There's no such thing. We're either moving up the ladder or moving down the ladder. Those are the only two options. Okay, something will always become our God and our guide if we're not making the Torah both of those things. Not God, but right? So what are we going to make What are we gonna put in that position in our lives? Right? If we proactively fill that space with good and positive elements, like Torah, right? Or are we going to let other, perhaps dangerous elements determine our outlook and determine our habits? Edmund Burke used to say that the only thing evil needs to flourish is for good men to do nothing. Right? The same goes for us. All that the evil inclination needs to flourish in us is for us to do nothing. Okay? This, what applies in the physical world applies in the metaphysical world as well. We have to fill the space around us with the beautiful flowing fountain of Torah, and we'll be moving up the ladder. Okay?
Yes.
All right. A little something on Hanukkah. So this is from Rabbi Ron Jawari. So Hanukkah, we know, commemorates the victory of the Jewish people over the Greeks in 165 BCE, before the Common Era. It's interesting that we mark that victory with a Hanukkah menorah, with light, right? Light represents Torah and wisdom. The light represents Torah, the oil represents wisdom. Totally unrelated to the military victory of Hanukkah, right? The true struggle, as we talked about earlier, against the Greeks was not for physical survival. It was to ensure the continuity of Torah values in the world, right? And so we can understand why then we commemorate it with a menorah, right? Because the light, because the battle was not over physical survival. It was over spiritual, the survival of our values. The Jews realized that if Greek values prevailed, then humanity was doomed. Right? If the culture of Athens and Sparta they had adopted this attitude of a master race, with all the evils that entails. Okay, we think this is a new thing today, or in the 40s. It's not. It goes back to the Greeks and even before that. Right? The Torah, on the other hand, promoted monotheism, the idea that all of mankind is created in God's image, and that each and every one of us can make the world a better place, and has a responsibility to respect all others and to do those, and to work on making the world a better place. Right? Oil represents the wisdom of Torah. Right? The flame can't survive without the oil. So it seemed that there was only enough for one day, and yet it burned for 8. We all know the story, right? That's symbolized because 8 is beyond reality, beyond the physical world, right? 7-day week, 7 days of creation. 7 represents the physical world. 8 is beyond to eternity, right? It also looks like infinity on its side, right? So it symbolizes the eternal victory of Torah values. So the light lasted for 8 nights is to teach us that just as oil, which is our wisdom, transcended all the limitations put on it by the physical world, by instead burning for 8 nights, the same way that transcended the physical, we too can be part of that destiny and illuminate the world with God's values for all time. Okay? So, happy Hanukkah a little early. Good Shabbos a little early. And thank you all for coming. See you next week.